Oh, goody.
Alright, what's going on everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Mercenaries video. This one we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So I thought it would be fun to take a look at 5 of my favorite, and I think some of the better performing new comps out there that are all about using some of the new Mercenaries we got in the most recent Mercenaries drop. So some old comps are still sticking around and are still powerful, but we are seeing a lot of new stuff, a lot of variety in the metagame. So I figured it'd be cool to take a look at 5 of my favorite comps, and I think some of the most powerful comps that are kind of emerging in the new Mercenaries meta. So we're going to take a look at these. We're also going to look at some stats for them, if there are stats available. And the codes for all these will be in the description. We're just going to be doing kind of a brief overview of the deck and kind of what it aims to do, taking a little look at the stats and that sort of thing. And if you want to see any more information or how these kind of decks play out, I do have videos up here on YouTube about most of these decks. And if I don't have one for one of them, it should be coming shortly. So we're going to dive right on into it here. Before we do, if you enjoy this type of content, do remember to like and subscribe. Does a ton to help out the channel and keeps the Mercenaries videos coming. So without further ado, let's take a look at the top 5 new Mercenary teams. So we're going to start off with Shadow here. So this is one I featured recently, and I think it is definitely one of the better builds, definitely one of the more popular builds. And so kind of the goal of this build is we're using Y'Shaarj in combination with QEYqwMgASgE and Vol'jin. QEYqwMgASgE gives all our guys some extra stats, and he makes some Divine Shield Golems for Y'Shaarj to steal some attack for, so he gets really, really big. And then Vol'jin slowing down an enemy on turn 1 is quite good. On top of that, we do get faster Shadow abilities, and Y'Shaarj is Shadow, like all the old gods. So being able to just go in for a crazy amount of damage at 3 speed, really powerful it turns out. It's just very good synergy on this comp. Then you have Azshara to come in off the bench with her basically a life root staff for shadow abilities. And even with the change to Mage Paramount, where it's only protecting her, not the whole team, she's still really, really good. That healing's really insane. And she just has some very, very powerful synergy with this comp. Sylvanas is the last kind of core of the unit here. Basically, these 5 characters are the absolute core to this Shadow build. She is kind of our big finisher, where she's benefiting from all the summons. We summoned all game, has Shadow synergy, and is just a really good way to close out the game. And then this last spot here, so if we look at the stats, this is actually the most popular build currently. All these stats are taken from HS Replay, the top 20% of players. Normally I do top 10%, but because we just had a patch recently, there's not quite as much data for top 10%, so we're looking at top 20% this time around. But Lich King here, really good, synergistic, I like him. I do think this is the flex spot in this comp though. You can run a lot of different stuff in this team if you so desire, and to try and tech against whatever it is you're seeing. I've seen Lokalars popular in this spot. I've seen Cookie. I've seen Sinestra. I've even seen Scabs. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of close out this comp, but Lich King is definitely a good one. So looking at the stats for this build, it is coming in at a 58% win rate, which is pretty good, and it is actually currently the most highly played comp in that top 20% bracket with 1,500 games. So it's looking really good. The other nice thing about it is it's relatively simple and straightforward to play. I do think your decisions start mattering a bit more in the mid to late game, but your early game is kind of usually pretty much the same no matter what you're facing, so it's pretty easy to learn. So really like this comp, definitely highly recommend it. Moving on to the next comp here. Frostbane. So this is the only one we don't currently have data on. I think there was data before, but in the last week, I think it just hasn't been quite as popular, so we don't have direct data on it right now. But the idea with this build is we just have the 4 core Frost units in Lokalar, Jaina, Varden, Belinda. I really do think the lock Jaina Varden open is still very, very powerful. Not against everything, but against a lot of the stuff out there right now, this is still really strong, but the bench is kind of what makes it a new comp here. So let's talk about that. We have Bane and Tyrande. So this build you could actually probably run the Totem if you want to, but we ended up going with the extra health and heal power. But basically, we're trying to use Bane here to get a combo of getting Earth Mother's Fury off twice. And the way we do that is with Tyrande with her Band of the Wilds equipment that allows Lune's Grace to double up your next arcane or nature ability, and this is nature. So this is really, really huge for dealing with some of the late game threats, most notably Sylvanas and Sinestra. Even Leroy, though, Big Leroy is pretty popular as well. There's almost no green that can survive this, pretty much. I think the only exception to that might be Diablo if he's gotten a really, really high HP total, but he's probably the only one. Pretty much every other green, they're going to take 100 damage from this, and they're going to die. And it's really quite good for closing out the game because our opener is very, very strong. I'm sure I don't really need to explain why Frost is still very, very good. Localar is just powering up our team with Frigid Winds. Jaina gets us with the scaling, and her Ice Elemental, or the Water Elemental, is actually quite useful sometimes too. Ice Block is still annoying, makes her hard to get rid of. And then even with the changes to Varden, Varden is still a very strong and powerful character. And that Death Rattle damage can be really, really nice when it gets scaled up by Jaina or Localar as well. And then Belinda's just been good on the bench. There are still some comps that are running Belinda as a lead. I think that's currently a mistake. I don't think Belinda is very good as a lead. But off the bench, getting that Water Elemental in sometimes for a good freeze, or being able to do a Frost Burn or Frost Dart after you have some Frost scaling is pretty strong. So if you're looking for a comp that doesn't need a ton of new mercenaries, but you just want to grind out some PvP wins for coins to help build up your collection, this definitely is not a bad option, as it is mostly old mercs, with the exception of Bane, who we're using as kind of our combo finisher. Next up, Cho Summons. So I felt this was fitting to talk about after Frost, because if there is a comp that counters Frost right now, I would say this is it. So the idea behind this comp is we're all about the summons. So we're using the Stash of Scrolls equipment on Cho here, which will make your minions take 8 less damage. 8 damage reduction is a ton. I really can't overstate it. It doesn't sound like that much on the surface. 8 damage reduction is a lot of damage reduction. And then not only does Cho have a way to make his own summons, but he also has a way to buff up all your other characters and summons. And since our build here is on the slower side, it's really easy to do that. And then things like Localar with their Hailstorm really can't do anything because it's hitting for 0 because it's not even getting through the resist, which is really, really cool. It wouldn't be a summon comp without N'Zoth. N'Zoth is just right at home in a summon comp. And on top of it, Eternal Torment, pretty nice for just getting that chip damage start of every turn. But we're really just throwing out some spawns of N'Zoth. These are particularly good in the summon comp because when they attack in, they don't take damage. So the only way your summons are getting damaged is by your opponent. And with Cho protecting them, you can make some really big summons that your opponent really has a hard time dealing with. And then on top of that, we do have a way to steal opposing summons, which is kind of cool. Or if we can get it down in cooldown, Corrupted Viscera, which will just absolutely annihilate the board if you have a handful of big summons buffed up. And it's happening at 2 speed, which is pretty fast. Even faster if we happen to get Bulgin swapped in. And then Y'Shaarj. So Y'Shaarj just fits the summon comp very naturally. He can kind of go 2 different ways here, which I think is pretty interesting. This current build, we have him with gaining the more attack, just kind of stealing the attack from your summons, so he can go in for some big swings. But unlike the Shadow build, this one actually uses him a bit more defensively too. You're going to be pressing that strength of Y'Shaarj much, much more in this build as well, to kind of protect your Cho and your N'Zoth sometimes. It could even be worth considering this equipment where whenever he gets attacked, he gains attack. But I think Mark is probably the better equipment for the time being. But he's really quite good in this comp. It's just any comp where you're making a bunch of summons and you can just steal the attack for some big hits. seems pretty good. And the fact that he doubles as a pretty good defense unit, just kind of the cherry on top there. And then the bench, kind of standard bench here for a shadow focused comp like this one. Vol'jin just allows us some very sweet revenge kills, and like I said, it can speed up the N'Zoth third skill sometimes. You could speed up your Y'Shaarj. Really depends what your opponent kills first. I think usually they're going to be targeting Cho, because otherwise they can't deal with the big summons, and the big summons will then usually kill them pretty fast. But yeah, Vol'jin makes a lot of sense on this comp, and then Queen Azshara as well. The healing is so big on this, just because oftentimes it's really hard to get that damage in versus the summons, and if you're healing every time you're doing shadow stuff, there are a lot of comps that just cannot kill the summons. So it's really cool seeing a summon comp like this work, as we haven't really seen one be super successful before this, focused around summons. And then Sylvanas, I mean, it wouldn't be a shadow focus comp without Sylvanas, and again, we're summoning all these minions, so because of that, Sylvanas is going to get really big, and then she just provides us a very nice finisher. So pretty standard stuff on the bench, but this one's really fun. And if you're looking for something that answers a lot of frost openers, because I know that it is popular on some parts of the ladder, this is what I would highly recommend. Looking at the stats for it, we can see coming in just under 60% win rate. Small sample size, only 200 or so games. I still think this one is not super popular yet. I don't think a lot of people have caught on to it, or maybe they're still leveling their Cho and Y'Shaarj. But if you're looking for an answer to Frost, this is pretty much, I think, the best one out there. Moving on here, we're going to look at our Totem comp. This one I made myself, and I really like this build. I do think it is one of the harder to play builds out of all the ones I've showcased so far, as a lot of the times the lines aren't very straightforward, and on top of that, you have to worry about positioning with Maestra. If you position poorly with Maestra, you can just lose games sometimes, but if you get good positioning, sometimes you'll just pretty much win off of that. So it can be a little bit hit or miss in that regard. The big thing about Maestra is if you're running into a lot of shadow, I probably wouldn't recommend this comp, because the Divine Shield Golems from Kazakus really mess up Maestra. It's just a very difficult thing for her to deal with if your opponent is doing good positioning with their golems. So that's pretty much the one hard thing I think this comp has tough time with, but I think it can beat most of the other comps in the meta. Basically with this, we're just using Elise to kind of buff up our bench here. Then we have Reno to kind of act as some decent protection, and he gets good value out of his death rattles. And then Bane, so this is kind of cool. We're using the totem on Bane in this build, and the idea with it is we're going to be attacking with Bane on turn 1. And this is pretty cool because it gives Bane 2 heal power, and then he gets swapped out with Maestra. Maestra's really our actual lead in this comp, because we actually want Bane in the late game to combo with Malfurion to help keep both himself and Leroy alive to close out the game. So it's kind of weird, and you do, like I said, have to be very mindful of your positioning. But once you figure out kind of the play patterns and how it works, this comp is actually very good. And in the late game, your sustain with Bane and Malfurion gets pretty out of hand. Like, you're just getting some nature abilities off. You're healing every time, makes Bane's chain heal even crazier. And you have the big AoE. You can even scale up your healing power even more while healing at the same time if you're nature comboing, which you usually will be, Malfurion. So I really like this comp, and I know Leroy might seem a little weird in this comp. To be honest, I wasn't 100% sold on him in it at first, but we really needed a good green on the bench, and I tried a few different things in this slot, and Leroy has a lot of value right now because he is just very strong in terms of being able to just come in, especially with that Elise buff, press 0. Not only are you going to deal crazy damage, if not kill some of your opponent's very powerful but usually weakened blues, on top of that he's going to scale when things die, and he's going to mess up the speed order of stuff, which oftentimes can work in your favor. And then Maestra is just kind of our third lead unit, swaps out with Bane. Maestra really really quite good if you can get the positioning right, but you do have to think about that pretty consistently, as if your opponent does play around your positioning, she gets a lot worse. Now, I didn't see stats for this exact version, but there was a version very similar to it that was actually running Rogers over Malfurion, so figured we'd take just a little look at that. It's coming in at a 57% win rate and 250 games, so smaller sample size, but comp seems to be doing pretty good. I think Rogers is a reasonable include, but I prefer the version with Malfurion, as I think the sustain you get with Bane and Malfurion is just too good to pass up, and I don't think we really need that big blue damage, as I don't think a lot of the heavy hitters that are coming in to close out the game are red. I think more often we're usually seeing greens or blues. So I think for that reason, I think Malfurion is a bit better of a choice there. So that's our totem comp, and now we're going to take a look at our final comp here, Dallas Humans. So Dallas was the one who came up with this comp. It's one of my favorite comps in the game. It's incredibly fun and very resilient. So the idea with this one is we're basically using Reno as kind of very similar to the prior comp, just using him as general protection. We want our Reno to eventually die, so we get the good value off the death rattles. And then we just have two buff units in the front. So we have Tyrion, who we're really just playing to kind of, he can deal with Trigor pretty effectively by shutting down its turn 2 ability, or by shutting down its ability to basically do damage on turn 2 with the Judgment of Humility. And then Elise also with the buff ability. It's a ton of stats. You give everything +5, +8 from Elise, and then Tyrion, when it dies, gives +8, +8. So that is what, +13, +16. That is a ton of stats. So we're actually hoping for our whole kind of opener to die here, and then we get to send in our Leroy Carriel Rogers bench. And this bench is really, really awesome. The fact that you can get Leroy in when he's really big and just go off with a Leroy Jenkins, and then if you kill stuff, he gets even bigger, is just really sweet. Carriel might seem like kind of a strange choice, but she's actually basically the reason this comp works, because a lot of the times your opponent will have an advantage. They'll clear off your stuff first, so you really need to get a ton of value out of your bench, and the way we do that is by setting up a death blow with Carriel. That's why we're running the Hammer of Dawn equipment, because it basically makes it so that death blow applies to your whole party, restoring 60 health to all your characters. That is a ton. That's usually a full heal for all your characters. So Leroy doesn't mind swinging into a bunch of big things with Leroy Jenkins if Carriel can clean up and heal him up next turn, so he can just get ready to do it again. And then Rogers is just a really good blue that benefits from the stat buffs. She just scales really, really quickly, so a lot of times you're one-shotting late-game red threats like Localar, which is pretty important. And then on top of it, you can also combine her Master Tactician with Carriel here, because Carriel is a little bit on the slower side. So 2 speed, kill something, get the death blow, heal up your whole team, and suddenly your opponent is going to have a pretty hard time dealing with your big humans. So I really like this comp. We got some stats on it as well. This one's hovering around 52-53% win rate. Also a little bit of a lower sample size at 280 games, but definitely one of my favorite of the kind of big unit comps. I do want to mention in kind of the same vein, this opener here, Reno, Tyrion, Elise, is actually just very, very good for a lot of different comps that care about stats and whatnot. I will show one other one here that I think is also a top tier comp, but we didn't really have much data on it yet. But it's the same opener with Elise, Reno, Tyrion, but we're using the Pirate bench. So the Pirates are really, really powerful off the bench. You could do a few different combinations. You could probably try a version with Smite and Patches, or even Patches in place of Eudora, but after seeing a bunch of people play this comp and playing against it myself, I think this might be the best version, which is the Edwin, Eudora, and Sneed. It's just a very, very powerful late game. You got that strong AoE with Sneed. Eudora with the cannons is actually very annoying against any comp that doesn't have good AoE. And then Edwin to speed them up and also just deal really huge damage himself with Assassin's Blade and Assisted Strike. So if you're looking for something to do with Pirates, definitely recommend use that same kind of core Elise, Reno, Tyrion opener, or just any comp that you want some big stats on your bench. Use that opener, throw whatever 3 mercs you want in the back, but these are 2 of the better ones, I think, the big humans and the big pirates. So yeah, those are our lists. I really like all of these. I think they all have a pretty important role in the metagame, and I think pretty much all of these comps, it should be possible to eventually climb to 12k if you do want to do so. It will take time, and it will take some learning, but it's definitely possible. All these comps, I think, have very reasonable power and win rates. So yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Again, if you want to see more about what these comps do or how they play in game, definitely check out some of the other videos I posted recently, as I have featured most of these here on YouTube already, and I'll definitely be doing more PvP videos very soon. But I do want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, do remember to like and subscribe. And again, all the deck codes and whatnot will be in the description. But that's going to do it for this one. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.